Welcome back to Elevate Inspiration for Sunday School. Hey, we're going to be a little different today, because tomorrow is Easter. So even though we're still in the prophet series, we're going to be looking at one particular prophet, Isaiah. So let's get started. When you think about service, do you ever think about suffering service? So in what context, if any, does service always include suffering? That's something to think about. You know, we're always talking about serving others, but what about the suffering aspect of that service? So our lesson starts a sudden conversation on the road to Emmaus. Now, we have two of Jesus' disciples. This is actually the third day of the crucifixion. They're in a deep conversation, and all of a sudden Jesus appears and start walking with him, but they do not recognize him. Now, what's interesting is Jesus asked the question, what has happened? Now, we're talking about current events, actually are surprised. You mean tell me you don't know what's going on? And they began to explain about Jesus, the Nazarene, how he was a man of God. He did outstanding work. He not only blessed God's people, but he blessed everyone. However, if you notice here, it says our priests and leaders betrayed him. They sentenced him to death. They crucified him. And I like this because their hope is diminished, because they say here, we had our hopes up that he was the one. He was the one that was going to deliver them from the Romans. Set up the nation again, like in the day of David. And notice here, now it is the third day, and his body is missing. His friends went there, and some of our friends went to the tomb. They check it out, and it was empty, and they are confused. They have lost hope. Now, notice what Jesus says here. He calls them, O fools, slow or hard to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and then enter into his glory? And then what does Jesus do? He starts talking to them about all the way from Moses to the prophets. Now, realizing now, Moses, that represents the first 5 books. And then the prophets, and he expounded and he opened their understanding to the scriptures. And I want to use the word again. Now, one of the verses that I really think that he referenced was the book of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is a prophet, so we're in our prophet series. He prophesies the year King Uzziah passed away. Remember that scripture, I saw the Lord. He also prophesied, and he got a chance to see the northern kingdom go into exile. And in the 53rd chapter, he prophesies this. He says, surely he hath borne our grief, carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, afflicted. So here, if you actually look at the first 3 verses in the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, you'll see that this person is not a famous individual. They kind of despise them. But all of a sudden, he become recognized as the chosen one, recognized as the Messiah. And then here it says, he was wounded for our transgression. He was bruised for our iniquity. Notice the word our, the chastisement of our peace is upon him. With his stripes, we are healed. We are like sheep gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And then notice the capital of Lord, Yahweh, has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So that's the grief, the sorrow, the affliction of the Messiah. They failed to recognize that in Scripture, to the point that his death, his oppression, his slaughter, his burial, he was oppressed, he was afflicted, and he never opened his mouth. He was like a sheep. And that day and time, they would take a sheep, the priest would take that sheep and would offer that sheep as a sacrifice. And that was a symbolic of what Jesus had to go through with. He was a sheep, and he, before his shears is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. He was carried off to be that sacrifice. And then notice here it says, for he was cut off out of the land of the living. He died. And then we go back again. The transgression of the people was he stricken. He made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich his death. And that's important, because he died among two thieves, the wicked. And then they laid his body in a rich man's grave. It says, because he did not show any violence, neither was there any deceit in his mouth. So the question that we're going to look at on tomorrow is, what will you say is the most important practice of Christians could adopt or improve on to eliminate deceitful speech patterns? So we're going to look at that in those deceitful patterns, speech patterns, tomorrow. And then the last two verses, I want to focus on this right here, because you look at this, it says, yet it pleased the Lord, it pleased Yahweh to bruise him and to put him in grief. So in other words, and I can imagine as he goes through the books to explain this, I bet they all knew of the story of their forefather Joseph. And in Genesis, the 50th chapter, and I think verse 20, Joseph tells his brother, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. You all had intent of doing evil to me by selling me into slavery, but look now, it worked out for the best because God meant it for good. Now I'm able to save you all from starvation. We never look at the grief that a person has to go with to order to be successful. You know, what's interesting is the book of Job, which is the oldest book in the Bible. And in the book of Job, we see his suffering that he went through. And if you notice, it was laid on him from heaven, because God questioned Satan, have you tried my servant Job? So I can see here, it says, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. Now, we never look at it from a standpoint that because of what Jesus went through, I'm here today. We are here, and we are able to reconnect to God. And we are able to prolong his days, because this happened 2,000 years ago, and we are still talking about it today. The pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. And then we end with, he shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied by his knowledge. Shall my righteous servant justify many? Justify many. Because of what Jesus, can you imagine the multitude that have come to the Lord just because of what he did on the cross? That number, no man can number. So the question we're going to talk about is, how will you answer a person who questioned the fairness of Jesus being punished for sins committed by others? Is there any fairness to that? Then we're going to dig a little bit deeper. So when you think about relinquishing the view, with many mountaintop experience, it can be difficult to return to a life below after leaving the magnificent scenery of Isaiah 53 behind. So if you think about Jesus left heaven and came to earth, for what reason? For us. So Jesus' death was not an accident or a random tragedy. It was the fulfillment of a divine rescue, a divine plan to rescue lost humans. So we're going to look at how will study of today's text results in changes to your thoughts, words, and action. Then we're going to dig a little bit deeper by looking at some verses in the New Testament. And I'd like to leave you with this thought to remember. Jesus makes both the prophecy of Scripture and our lives complete. Hey, our Zoom session is Sunday at 4 p.m. There's the meeting ID and the passcode. Hey, it doesn't last long. Come ready to answer those questions, and we're going to have a great discussion. And like I always say, see you in Sunday school.